Welcome back to Business Mastery for startups, scale-ups, and early-stage businesses with your host, Gerry Gadoury. That's me. And our guest today is Chris. But before we talk about Chris, quick shout out to Suffolk University, as you might have noticed from the difference in audio and lack of video, that we're live at Business Mastery, at Startup Boston's Boston Startup Week. And we're very happy to be here and very thankful that we're invited. So our audience today is comprised of everything from startup curious students through founders and VCs. So pretty diverse audience. We will be open to questions for any folks that want to ask them. But for now, let's circle back to Chris. Chris, my friend, is a seasoned CXO, a teacher of entrepreneurial studies at a rival school, Northeastern, up here in Boston, and has been around this space for a very long time. I'd like to transfer the mic over to Chris and learn a little bit more detail about his background and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you, Gerry, for having me on today, and thank you to Suffolk University and Startup Boston. Yes, I do teach on the side at Northeastern, which is a friendly rival school. So I actually just started teaching a course in the entrepreneurship and innovation sector over there. But my day job, mainly what I do, I'm a partner at a firm called TechCXO.
Yep.
That's actually headquartered in Atlanta. We have about 120 partners like me. I think like 15 to 20 are here in Boston, in the Boston, New England area. And then we've got a big group, we call them pods, in New York as well. But we provide fractional and interim executives across the spectrum of kind of all the C-level functions. That's our calling card. Yes, I've been doing that. I joined the firm about a year ago, although I have been talking to the firm about joining for a couple of years. And before that, as you mentioned, a long history in kind of the startup, early stage tech community. I was actually just on a panel this morning, and the moderator, actually, not one of the other panelists, said she had been with 31 startups. I don't think I've been with 31. I think it's probably more in the low to mid-teens. But yeah, I've been at quite a few places over the years. I've definitely got a lot of experience, and I'm enjoying the support for the industry that we're kind of seeing from the city, from the university, from Startup Boston. Stephanie has done a fantastic job with this event, and just the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem and startup ecosystem here in Boston and New England. It's really great to see such a great turnout today and be able to be up here talking to you and talking to them as well.
100%. And I'll tell you, I think Boston deserves a lot more credit as a startup hub. Austin, San Francisco, in my opinion, they get too much love. I think we've got such a competitive advantage with our educational infrastructure here. Mm-hmm. There's just so much happening, and what Steph is doing with Startup Boston is absolutely amazing. Now, you mentioned, I got dialed back, that woman who said she was in 31 startups. First of all, I think I would be talking to my therapist about that, because that sounds like a tough road.
Well, to be fair, she's been doing fractional her whole career, and I've really only been doing fractional now for a little over a year, except for I've had some consulting gigs at different points in my career. But
sure.
She's been basically working for multiple clients for her entire career. So that's why she's worked with 31 different startups. It wasn't 31 different full-time jobs.
Oh, yeah, okay, that makes more sense.
That would be a little bit insane.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I've been from startup to exit once. Mm-hmm. And start up to where I am now twice, mm-hmm. and that was plenty.
Yeah, exits are fun. I've been through 2 IPOs and a whole lot of M&A, and I've been through M&A both on the buy side and the sell side. But yeah, I've been acquired any number of times, and it's always an interesting experience. So yeah,
I've got to say this. So the exit was Apicero. I was the second employee. Mm-hmm. We went from that to 2,500 folks. 9 offices, 3 countries in 5 years. So super rapid growth, 7 day a week, the dance. But I learned something important, and that's this. I'm a small business person. I don't like large business. And something to keep in mind as a startup founder is if you're taking the VC exit route of mm-hmm. acquisition, IPO, whatever, well, IPO especially, I guess, but that company is likely to be larger at the end than you would like, and when you get acquired, you're going to be a small piece of an even larger company. Mm-hmm. And that was a big part of the impetus of me creating the consulting company that I did.
Well, I'm a little different in that I love early stage too.
Yes.
And I really do love the early stage startup phase. But I've also found that big companies, if you know what you're getting into, you understand them, they really have their their benefits as well. So, I'll tell you, for instance, I was with a startup called Vertica Systems that was acquired by HP. And it was funny, I joined at a funny time. I joined just after the acquisition had happened, but they hadn't really integrated the business yet. And, it was, there was some, well, first of all, the general manager was a good friend of mine. And so the guy who recruited me, I had known, I had worked for before. And so, there's a lot of reasons I went. Vertica was, and still is, by the way, to this day, a fantastic product. So there was a lot of reasons to go there, but everybody was like, why are you on HP? You're a startup guy. And I was like, well, first of all, I know the people, I know the product, it's really good. But if I thought I was going to hate it, it was actually like, I wouldn't say toward the tail end maybe, but most of that was some of the best 5 years of my career. I really got to sort of learn the ropes. And having been involved in a number of M&As where we're acquired by bigger companies and some of them didn't go as well, that was actually, and HP's definitely done some not great acquisitions, but Vertica was actually one of the really good ones, and we were treated fabulously. And so it was a great time. So anyway, I don't hate big companies. I'm not anti-big companies. Actually, when I'm talking to my students at Northeastern, I've already said this a couple times, and I've said it to my own kids when they ask for my advice, which is not that often. But
and less
I'm like,
as they
it's
get
not
older.
a bad thing to start with a big company and go to a big company for a while and kind of learn the ropes, because early stage often is chaos. And, it's fun. And sometimes it really is successful and everybody gets rich and everybody's happy. But a lot of times it doesn't work out, too. But it's not a bad thing to kind of, at some point in your career, have some big company experience.
Yeah, let me pause there.
Very
Because
different.
there's
So,
a lot
yeah.
to expand on that. So first of all, I don't want to misspeak or be misunderstood. I'm not anti-big business.
Yeah.
I'm just personally wired for small business. I like the amount of control I have. I like the reach. I like all those things. In very big business, which I've also been a part of, I just didn't enjoy it. So that's a personal thing, not an attack on big business. But the second thing you said that I think is important, and we actually had the same conversation earlier today, I strongly recommend that folks just coming out of college work for somebody else first. And the reason for that, in my 25 years of being in this space, I see most businesses fail not because of poor market fit, all those things, but because of two things. Number one, the founder lacks meaningful leadership skills. Some of them, I would go as far as to say, couldn't lead kids to a candy store. Others, it's just a lack of basic business fundamentals. Like the mistakes that they make cause the runway problems that they list as the reason they went out of business. And you get those, frankly, you're learning on somebody else's dollar and figuring that stuff out. I'm not saying you can't do a startup out of college, but I'm saying there's a lot good to be said about working for somebody else first.
No, 100%. And I wasn't taking it as you were negative on big companies, but it's funny. I've just kind of been in both, and I've been in other bigger companies too. I mentioned HP. I was part of an acquisition by Reuters at a point in my career. I actually started in a big Fortune 500 company, first got out of school. So I kind of see them as different and complementary. And, as you started to allude to there, the people culture issues are the biggest ones, and what makes, an acquisition often succeed or fail is very much around the alignment with the people and the alignment with the culture and the goals of the team. And so, good acquisitions, because like I said, Vertica was a great acquisition for HP. We were, there were definitely issues, don't get me wrong, but we were definitely very aligned on those high level things. And to me, having been a CEO now 3 times, those are the most important things, far and away.
100%, yes.
Yep.
And I'm going to say, well, my book, Destination Employer, is all about that, so it's going to be difficult for me to disagree. But when we talk about acquisitions, that's something a little bit different. A good friend of mine ran a technical staffing firm, grew to about $150 million in 10 years, which in the staffing industry, less than 15% ever even make it to 10 million. So great job. The thing they were most known for organizationally was an incredible sales team. They were just wild men. They were acquired by a company that wanted the sales culture. That's what they bought them for. They'll stay nameless because this was not a good acquisition. But they bought them for that reason. They, however, were a very process-driven company. Their, the time president was a CPA. He's a finance guy. He assigned a dollar value to everything. Within a year of the acquisition, they had completely smothered the life out of that sales culture. They, rather than utilize the culture of the company they bought for that reason, they tried to make that company them and killed the acquisition. It was literally, by the time everyone had vested, they got literally the day after they left. There's not a single one of senior leadership left in that company.
Any senior leadership
Zero.
or just sales senior leadership?
Zero.
Yeah.
The two owners became the president, then the other one became the chief people officer. They both left as soon as they could. The head of sales of the old company came on as an SVP of sales for the new company. He left literally the day after he vested and was able to.
Yeah.
So.
I've been in a number of crazy startup sales cultures, both in them and leading them, and they're really hard to graft onto a big structured business. And look, bigger companies do tend to become more risk averse. A lot of the things that happen oftentimes in those, I think, what did you say, wild boy, wild bro sales cultures are not always compatible with big company HR type practices. And so this is a story as old as time. But you do what you got to do when you're early and trying to get the business off the ground. And then things change when you get acquired. But that's okay. So
absolutely. But my point in mentioning it, then dialing it back to the culture piece, is I tend to talk about talent and growing culture and making sure that you're representing the true culture, so that people don't have a shock when they come aboard. Literally this morning at the authors event, I was talking to a woman who, after taking her job, felt that she'd been bait and switched. When I talked to her for a little bit, it became clear that she hadn't really been bait and switched. There wasn't a lie, but what it was that the employer brand they'd built was created by the perception the founding team had of the culture versus what the culture really was.
Right.
So when she came aboard, it was a night and day difference. She very quickly bounced out, as is often the case. And with the acquisition, using that to extend the metaphor, it's the same thing. They bought them for a reason, but didn't take the time, to your point, to see if there was compatibility. And then they smothered it to death, and it was a waste of whatever they paid.
Yeah. Well, I remember, our company, and again, I'm talking about Vertica and HP, when we were acquired, because like I said, I kind of joined right at that moment in time, we were killing it. We were doing really, really well. And because we were doing well, sorry, my voice is going there a bit, but because we were doing well, there was a lot of people in corporate who wanted to kind of attach themselves to us. And really, I think most, I wouldn't say all, most of them sincerely wanted to be involved and to help. But the reality was, it was like every time we get a little bit of help from corporate, it was instead like a little bit of sand getting thrown in our gears, And so it got harder. And the thing was, at the time, we had at least initially, we had really good air cover from corporate. So who was kind of like, these people kind of come in and some of them want to help and some of them want to give you orders, but you don't have to listen to them. Just keep doing what you're doing. And that eventually kind of dissolved a little bit over time, over the next few years. And eventually, we were a software company, and HP spun off the whole software business, eventually became part of a company called Micro Focus, and now it's part of OpenText. Like I said, Vertica's still out there for a good product. I'm actually getting together with some former colleagues later today. So it was a great team, great product, and it remains a great product. But yeah, the more corporate help we got, it definitely changed things. Let's put it that way. And in many ways, slowed us down. Some of that slowing, you could argue, was maybe necessary, but yeah, there's a lot of change that happens, and it really does impact the culture. But again, if you've kind of gone through it, you kind of understand, okay, here's how it needs to work, here's why it needs to work, and you have an understanding, and there's a lot of good to be gained still.
It's interesting. I'm experiencing this firsthand right now. So I am the founder of Redbeard Solutions. We are an HR consulting company. We help startups and early stage businesses to implement the destination employer methodology for my book. That's one of my jobs. My other job is a group of friends of mine, founders and investors from other enterprises, bought 3 different staffing firms. And they put them together under one banner called Qualis One, which I've stepped in as the CEO of. So I'm putting the 3 companies together, deciding which aspects of which cultures we're going to maintain. I'm also making sure we're stabilizing the major accounts. That's one of the challenges with staffing, is anytime there's a change, you run the risk of losing big clients.
Yep.
So I'm kind of going through that right now, and it's not easy to take 3 disparate organizations and form a new one that's better than the other 3.
Yeah.
So it's not easy.
You can't just plug and play pieces, take this piece of one, and conceptually you can, but the reality is it's all that people stuff kind of gets in the way.
Yeah, it sounds like Legos, but in practice, it's
Right.
more like making a cake.
Right.
Everything bleeds into
There you
the
go.
other ingredient.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, it's been exciting, but you've got 3 different teams who are learning to work together, making the hard decisions of which redundant roles, who's staying, who's not. Interviewing the major accounts to see what they like, what they don't. Utilizing this as a catalyst to get better feedback, saying, "Hey, I'm the new owner, and what did you like before? What didn't you like? What would you like to see continue? What would you like to see stop?" So it's an exciting time. I don't relish being back to the 7-day-a-week work week. I will love when that's not the case anymore.
But you say you love early stage. That's what,
I do.
Yeah.
I really do. And honestly, when this is all stable, I'll probably get bored and hand the CEO role off. It's not. I am a drama queen, Chris. I have to admit that about myself. I like the crazy.
The crazy is fun.
Yes.
So.
And again, not disparaging big business, but once everything's stabilized and Monday looks like Tuesday, looks like Wednesday, it's just not my place anymore.
Yeah. Well, when I was just on the panel, every once in a while you have a thought. You're like, well, if I say this, somebody's going to get mad at me. And I've just kind of hit one of those points because one of the things that I've also noticed is that, and this is going to sound negative, and it's not, but it's just one of these things you need to understand. In the early stages of a company, for the most part, people realize, and if the CEO is doing a good job, and the investors, that the way you're going to do really well is by making the company successful. So right? Like that's pretty straightforward.
In related news, water is wet.
Right, exactly. But bigger companies, that starts to change. And what happens, and having been through a number of acquisitions, is people start to think, and they're not necessarily wrong, that the way to kind of optimize is really to start paying more attention to their own career. So they start becoming more inward looking. Like there was a lot of this at HP. It was like you started to realize that I was spending overtime, and again, not a criticism, but over time, coming from the startup world where you're spending almost all of your time fighting battles outside the company, all of a sudden you're fighting more battles inside the company, whether it's for resources or for that promotion or, and it's a natural thing. That's what I mean. I don't mean to make it sound like a bad thing, but people's attention, their mind share, their kind of motivation for coming to work every day just starts to slowly and subtly turn. And not all of them, and I think the people who actually tend to rise the highest in these larger companies are the ones that manage to maintain the perspective that, the important battles are the ones we fight outside the company, not inside our walls. But those inside the walls issues just become bigger and bigger and bigger and draw more and more and more attention. So anyway, that's what, it's not to accuse anybody of being, well, I'm not naming any names anyway, but being careerist, but the careerist impulse just starts to rise more as the size of the company grows. And that's one of the things you sort of need to beat it back, but at the same time, you also have to understand it. Like some people, that's why they come to work. They're not there to go through an IPO or get acquired. They're there to feed their family.
But I think, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you just hit on something, though, that's a little bit more profound than that might sound on the surface. So I'm a drama queen, self-admitted. I like the chaos. I like the craziness of the early stage. And when things become more codified, it just gets boring for me. But knowing that, that's why I like startups. You're in, you exit. That's my career is 10 startups.
Right.
But for a big company person, and for those of you without video, which will be everyone, I was just making bunny ears because I'm usually used to being on video. For those folks, they don't look at it that way. Their goal is to be with that company for as long as they can be.
Right.
So for them, those careerist tendencies are more relevant.
Right.
For me, it's not. It's just a different thing. I think that circles back to something that's critical is, taking responsibility for ourselves, taking the time to know ourselves, to understand where we thrive, and putting ourselves in those situations.
Right. And it loops back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that, oftentimes for early career people, it's not a bad thing to go inside a big company and see how all this works. It's kind of a natural process, but, it's not the startup world, but it's kind of good to know that, at some point you may get acquired, you may want to, learn kind of how this all works and how all these kind of functions fit together in a very structured organization, and then go do a startup. So, and then go try to change the world.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I've got to say, not the same path, but the same outcome, or at least a similar outcome. I spent about 7 years consulting into technology services companies. I would audit their sales teams. If they were technology services on the recruiting side, I'd audit their recruiting teams. I'd look at the way the management team was structured and how they interacted with the teams. And I worked for probably 85, 86 companies in that period of time. I learned more in that period of time than the 10 years before, easily, because I saw firsthand the tiny differences that led to incredible success versus, failure at worst, average at next to worst. And that evolved into me taking senior executive roles. I'd usually take them for 18 to 24 months, COO, president, whatever. And that success came from what I learned consulting. But the thing about that was so interesting was just how much commonality there was. Like how what worked in one company would, not the fine points, obviously.
Right.
I was a COO of a custom software development house, president of a API implementation company. So, different things. But just what works from a leadership and culture perspective is pretty consistent.
Right. Yeah, the people skills, the soft skills tend to map over. They're different when you go to a different entity, but they're not fundamentally 180-degree flipped.
Right.
A lot of the core leadership skills map very well to different types of organizations. Similarly, I was just on a panel this morning that my firm TechSo sponsored on fractional, and we were talking a lot about playbooks. Like, when do you bring in a fractional person? Generally speaking, when you need somebody who's run the playbook and knows the playbook and has a playbook, and it doesn't necessarily mean that playbook is exactly the playbook that maps to your organization, but there's a lot of commonality out there. I said this on the panel, I'll say it here again. I don't know if you know who Robert Smith is. He's a pretty well-known investor. He founded Vista Equity Partners.
Okay.
And I've worked in a lot of SaaS, software as a service company, clients in my career, and I've got some as clients, as jobs, but I've got some as clients right now. And he said something one time that I thought was very profound. Speaking of profound, he said, SaaS companies taste like chicken. And a little bit of an overstatement. And what he, I think, meant by that is that the playbook for building a SaaS company is pretty similar across all sorts of different SaaS companies. I think certainly a bit of an overstatement. And now you see, for instance, vertical SaaS, industry SaaS becoming more of a thing. You're seeing different pricing models. So maybe it's different types of chicken or different types of poultry. But still, I think the ability to kind of understand that playbook and understand kind of how to roll it out, how to make it work, and being able to kind of map that skill across different companies, that's what ultimately senior leadership is all about. So,
and I think that's the beauty of the whole CXO model, is when you're not, whether it's a budget consideration or maybe even a consistent work consideration, where you're not really ready yet to bring that person in as a full-time player, but you can still benefit from the experiences of somebody who's been there and done that. We all want to innovate, but I just said it a minute ago, 85, 86 different companies, and I would say 80% of what they did was the same. That 20% was a big 20,
right,
for sure, but 80% of it was the same. So if you can bring somebody in for 10 hours a week, whatever the fractional period is, and they can provide that I've done this 20 times position, that's invaluable.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what my firm really tries to provide, and I think we do pretty well. Witness, we've been doing it for 20, 25 years, although I just joined a year ago. But it definitely fits. Of course, not to change the topic or argue against myself, but now have you read the Founder Mode, Paul Graham?
Has anybody not read that article?
Yeah, has anybody not read it? It sort of says just the opposite. Of course, he cites Brian Chesky at Airbnb as his example of why, everything we just described is bad. And I think it's fair to say Brian Chesky's pretty much a unicorn. I mean, I don't know him personally, but...
You just hit the word I want to touch on later. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you get that really special, and to some degree, emotionally intelligent kind of CEO leader, and, you hang on to him. And, and you have that. You don't necessarily need these, these modular playbooks. You just need somebody who really understands the gut of the business. And it also reinforces what we're saying about the people side. But anyway, the whole founder mode discussion, I'm actually intending to bring that up with my Northeastern class pretty soon. I think it's like, we're in week 2 right now, and I think it's like week 6 or week 7. We're talking about culture, and founder mode's definitely on the reading list. So I think it raises a lot of good points. I was actually listening to the All In podcast. They were kind of arguing, well, this was stuff we already knew. And yeah, to some degree that's true, but I think some of the points are still very valid. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit when they say something new, we're in late stage capitalism now. There's not anything new, so I mean, the new stuff's not there. And that article, which was a wonderful article, if you haven't read it, if you're one of the 3 people in the business world that hasn't, I recommend that you do.
If we're on a podcast this week, we have to bring it up.
Exactly.
Right?
Oh, have I mentioned AI yet? It's 2024.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
I'm legally required to mention that.
Well, AI is passe now. Founder mode's
Exactly. It's replaced it. What's tomorrow?
See, there is something new.
See?
So, there's always something new.
So the thing with founder mode, the thing with the unicorn piece is that we have to remember for every Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, whoever, there's another 50,000 incredible founders that do things the normal way. I'm bunny earring again. I apologize. I'm used to being on video.
That's all right.
But that do things the normal way. And again, Steve Jobs being a wonderful example. There are things he was incredible at. But if you've read any of the biographies about him, there's also areas where he was an objectively horrible human being. So again, articles like this, if a unicorn can do a thing a certain way, that's wonderful. But for the rest of us mortals, here are the business fundamentals. Let's just get, to quote one of my longtime teammates, let's just get shit done, and we can talk about that later over beer.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, those failed 50,000 for every Brian Chesky, they don't get all the media attention. They don't get, those stories don't get told. They should actually get told much more aggressively. I've got a sort of friend and colleague, a guy named Dave Kellogg. He's a pretty well-known consultant advisor for early stage companies. He's out in California. He posted something on LinkedIn just last week. I think he might have reposted, but they were talking about there are now many founders who have found themselves in a situation where there's not a great exit opportunity for the company. The company's not failing, but at the same time, it's not succeeding. They're just kind of stuck. And they're out of obligation to their investors and out of obligation to their teams. They're just stuck. And they're very unhappy. They're there's a lot of misery out there right now. And they're saying these stories should get told more often, and they should. So anyway, the point that Dave posted this thing, I have to look it up or look him up on LinkedIn, and you'll see it. It was maybe a week ago, and it's very true. It's honestly, like a year ago, and I'm not going to name any names. I was in a startup situation myself where I could tell that things weren't. Almost as soon as I signed on, I was like, yeah, this is not the place for me, and I'll spare the details. And what happened was the funding kind of came apart, and the company came apart, and as much as that was painful, it was also a blessing in disguise because, I kind of realized, and I think a lot of AI startups, for instance, are going through exactly this right now.
It's a business cycle thing. They're going to hit the consolidation phase.
Yeah, they were able to raise some early capital on we're a cool new buzzy AI startup, but now all of a sudden they're realizing the capital requirements to be a success in AI are just absolutely massive. And and look, there will certainly be some AI startups that we never heard of. It's not like, Google, Microsoft, Meta, are going to own, or in OpenAI are going to completely own the world, or Amazon. But, there will be some successful startups, but there's going to be a whole lot that don't.
As always.
Yeah, and there's some great ideas out there, and there's some great people out there. And, but those stories, unfortunately, don't get told. The media focuses on only the successes. As I used to say when I was back in college, because it was around the time he was in college, for every Michael Dell, there's like 50,000 other kids who built PCs in their dorm room and never became Michael Dell, right?
Yeah, played Doom on them.
Yeah, exactly. I knew a few. So it's like, any case, so there's all the more reason, looping back to what we were saying earlier. So for, startups are fun, startups are cool, but early in your career, not necessarily a bad thing to get some big company seizing.
Yeah, I want to expand on what you said there. That's important. I love the happy stories when I'm down. It lifts me back up. There's a shot. I'm still in it. But the reality is, I think the 2023 stat was 93% fail. The majority of people aren't going to make it. And having the courage to try is something, but, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be all in mentally, but having an exit plan is not the worst idea ever, because 93 out of 100 of you are going to need it.
Absolutely. Well, but there's having a plan, but then there's also quoting Mike Tyson, right? It's like,
Fair.
Was it no strategy or no plan?
Everybody's going to plan until I punch him in the face.
Until you get punched in the face,
which
right?
he stole from Clausewitz.
So it's a plan, but also optionality. So kind of paths and options. And I think in a lot of respects, not entirely, because I think everybody needs to think this way for the sake of their career, but I think, that's also a lot of like a CEO's job that I kind of learned, is to make sure that you're sort of preserving those options is the wrong way. Identifying them, you've kind of got to keep a lot of tendrils out, because you don't really know what's going to happen ultimately at the end of the day. And oftentimes, and we're jumping around topics, I realize here, when startups say like, our goal is to get acquired. I'm like, that's a bad goal, because ultimately you have no control over that. So because the entity that controls the acquisition is the acquirer, not you. So you need to build a business to be a successful business and be a growing, sustainable business. If you do that well, you will come across opportunities to get acquired. And by the way, one of the things, and this is kind of what I've done a lot in my career, is building the right partnerships and identifying those opportunities early, saying, hey, this company might want to buy us someday, but I don't want to go walk in and talk to corp dev today. I want to walk in and maybe I want to build a relationship with them and see what they're like to work with, and see if they like working with me, because that creates the kind of optionality down the road that creates the opportunity to get acquired. But, building a business to flip it is a really bad strategy, because you have no control over whether it happens or not, or when it happens. And of course you get into market conditions like we've been in the last year or two, and there's very few of these things happening. Although I should say, actually, I was referring to him earlier. I mentioned the GM who I went to work for back at Vertica. His company actually just got acquired this morning for $2.5 billion. So these things do happen. I actually wrote a piece for CIO.com a few weeks ago. I do think the M&A market is going to step up a lot over the next couple months. And there was some nice evidence involving a good friend of mine this morning. So I was kind of happy to see that as I was commuting into Boston. So M&A is going to start happening, and it already is. So,
let me pause you again. You said a lot.
We're jumping a lot of different things.
So I think acquisition as an exit plan is good, but
as long as it's not your only one.
Hold that time a second. But you said something that's critical. Before all, and again, going back to foundational business, building a good, valuable business is the goal.
Right.
The way you exit it is the way you exit it. But if you are planning on being acquired and you come into a bad market, if you run a good business, you can ride that market until it picks up again. If your plan was to get acquired and that was the end of the story and you run to a bad market, your next up is probably bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm. Right. It can't be your only plan.
Yes.
So, and it really shouldn't even be your primary plan. It should be something you should look for opportunities for and plant seeds, but you need to build a business to build a business. At the same, mapping it back to startups too, and I'm not trying to change topics on you again, but
here we are.
It's just like building a startup where the very first thing you do, and that's the other thing. And I think people have started to realize this now over the last couple of years in particular, but, even not too many years ago, like there was this idea, particularly for younger entrepreneurs, the very first thing I have to do when I start a company is find investors and get funded. The very first thing you need to do is figure out what business you want to build and how you can build a sustainable, growing, profitable business. And once you've not only figured that out and can tell that story, but ideally have also started to implement that, then you can go talk to investors, and that's the right time. But until you've done that, you shouldn't be talking to any investors at all.
Yeah, and an important part of what you just said there, too, is that the further you put that off, the more success you can show, the more options and control you're going to have in the fundraising stage. If you're fundraising at ideation, that's a lot harder sell than fundraising when you've got even not a profitable business, but a viable one that's found product market fit, that has a customer base, user base. But let me circle back to what you said. So when we built Apicero, it was built to be acquired. So it was the opposite of what you just said, but not really, because so a little bit of history make it make sense. Apicero was a MuleSoft consulting company. We got on the space just before MuleSoft was acquired by Salesforce. Then we put all of our energy into embedding ourselves in the Salesforce ecosystem. So it was built to be acquired. And like any company that's focused on hockey stick growth to up our acquisition valuations, we were reinvesting every dollar and then some that we earned. But, we were building an incredibly viable business. Now, we only did MuleSoft, and we built a MuleSoft bench because that was the value to be acquired, was to have a turnkey MuleSoft team. But at any point, if we stopped reinvesting the money, we were profitable. So we built an incredible business along the way. But the plan from the beginning was where we put our bet was that having a MuleSoft bench would be something that a larger consulting company would want.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, at the risk of sounding like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, as you know, somebody had said to me early in my career, I remember, I worked early in my career for a firm called the Yankee Group, and I don't know, they're now part of S&P. They were kind of a market research company. It was actually it wasn't my first job in tech. It was actually, but it was pretty early in my career. Howard Anderson, who founded the Yankee Group, he still is very good friends. He's been kind of my professional mentor in a lot of ways, or at least one of them over the years. And I remember him essentially saying, like, in tech, everybody's for sale all the time. It's just a matter of the price, because that's and that's what makes tech a fun, dynamic industry. Is I mean, it's not like no, you wouldn't want to go and say, well, we're not going to try to sell the company. Of course, you would sell the company at the right price, but you can't neglect we have to build a business because you're not going to be worth much if you don't do that. And I think, mapping it back to what we were just talking about, I think that's what a lot of these AI companies, AI startups did. They were able to raise a little money, and they're like, well, we'll just raise a little money, we'll build this cool thing without like a plan for revenue, profits, growth, anything like that. And Google or, Amazon will buy us, and, you have no control over that. And if you haven't built a business that can be a business independent of that, you find the numbers game is just brutal right now. And we're obviously in this market where valuations, although I do think, as I said, they're coming back, have been pretty depressed. So, you got to have a business in there. And then you can pick your spots.
And what we're seeing in AI especially now is that a lot of these companies were really just the next iteration of OpenAI's product. There was no moat, there was no anything. And they just...
Or thin layers on top of it.
Exactly. So, exactly. So I could talk about that forever, but everyone has, so I'm not going to.
That's been well covered.
Let's circle back to the CXO piece, because I think that there's a lot of value there that people don't understand. So I'm going to use you as an example. You've been a CEO, and you are a CXO. So first of all, how is it different being the CEO of a company versus being a CXO to many? And number two, what do you perceive the value your clients get from that?
Well, I can talk for me and I can talk for the firm. I'll start with the firm because I say this often to people. There are some roles, even in the startup world, because it's even more true in kind of the private equity world, which actually is where we probably do a lot more of our business because they're slightly different. But in the startup world, like fractional CFO is a thing. Just about every startup is, they need a senior finance person to put the model together, to help, present to investors. Obviously, at some point, they're going to raise capital. They're going to get acquired. They need the talents of a senior finance executive. They realize they can't hire that person necessarily full-time, nor do they need that person full-time. They need a controller, a bookkeeper to run the business day-to-day. They may only need the CFO a couple hours a week, a couple hours a month, maybe even a couple hours a year, but they need that person. So like fractional CFO is definitely a thing. And Tech CXO started as Tech CFO, essentially. And that's still a significant percent of our business. I'm pretty certain it's the biggest part of our business. Having said that, and oftentimes this actually comes from our CFOs, is they'll go into a company and they'll say, well, we have other issues. We have growth issues. We have culture issues. We have product issues. And there are other functions where it could be helpful to bring in, HR is a good example. Other talented people who have experience, who can hit the ground running, who know the playbook, going back to what we were talking about earlier, or maybe have multiple playbooks. Yes, we could go hire somebody junior and train them, but if I'm a founding CEO and, I'm going to go try to hire a head of sales, but I'm a product person. I've never run sales. So what business do I have, bring on a head of sales? So maybe I want to go get a more experienced one. So that's kind of where we come in. And the other thing is we do both fractional and interim as well. And interim's a little bit different. Like interim, I have, been a few interim CEO opportunities. Like, for instance, there was one case where CEO had a significant health issue right after the funding closed, and they just needed somebody to come in for a while, and I was able to kind of help them out. So, so things like that do happen. It's not fractional. That was basically full-time for a short period of time. I'm actually kind of doing that with another company right now, although not because of a health issue. So we do a variety of things, but our model, and it's not everybody's model in fractional, is we just had a whole panel on this morning, like I said, is that we're C-level, and I don't know, I always feel a little cheesy saying that, but it's obviously in the name of the firm, but very senior people. Sometimes I jokingly say we're gray hair for hire, so you need that. And by the way, I mentioned too, like, PE actually loves this model because PE tends to have a little different motivation. They love having people who can kind of come in, get something done, don't need a lot of ramp up, don't need a lot of hand holding. And then when they're done, they can move on. But if they did a good job, I might bring them back for another one. There's sometimes the time frame over which they look at their investment. A lot of PE firms, they invest with an intent to be out in like 2 to 3 years, and it's more about restructuring the company than building the company. While in the VC world, it's more like 5 to 10 years. So it's a very different, you want a much more longitudinal, and the value of you want to pay more in equity versus cash. So there's different models, but we've built a nice business. We've been in the Inc. 500 for years. Again, I just joined a year ago. I've been talking to the firm for like 2 or 3 years. And, it's a great place to be. And we offer the full suite of C-level functions. So, yes, we have CFOs, but we have CHROs. As mentioned, we have my group is called Executive Operations, which we sometimes say fractional CEO. And I always say, well, that's a little weird unless your name is Elon. So, I say we're fractional general management. We have tech people, we have CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, chief security officers. We have sales and marketing, so we have kind of all the C-suite functions, and because we've been doing this a long time, and so that's the breadth of the business. But yeah, it's a fun place to be. And for somebody, going back to the gray hair thing, right? I'm at the point in my career I kind of want to have more of a portfolio of clients. Some where I'm doing more hands-on work, some it's a little more advisory, do a little teaching, as I mentioned. So I kind of like having the portfolio of stuff to work on where I can kind of apply my skills. And across a number of companies, and honestly, it's great learning as well. Both giving back and taking from, both learning and teaching. So I'm really enjoying it. It's a good fit for me, but it's not necessary for everybody.
Of course not.
A lot of people I do get outreach very often. As a matter of fact, I think I got a few today after the panel. I know I got a few today, where people are looking at it as a way station to a full-time job. Well, nothing wrong with that. That's totally fine. But that's not what my firm does. We're really in the business. I do think for startups, like a try before you buy both ways can be a very good thing for all the reasons you described. Like sometimes the cultures can be a little weird, or not. In some cases, they don't even really exist, and you really figure out, do I want to be here? Like I said, I had an experience like that not too long ago myself. It was actually kind of a big deciding point why I decided, I think I want to do this. But yeah, so the sort of, try before you buy, rent to own kind of model, that's fine. If you're going to do that, that's more do it independently. Don't join a fractional firm. But there's nothing wrong with that. And, companies like that too, investors like that, we can bring this person in and see how they do as a consultant. Honestly, looking back at my career, some of the best gigs I've had in my career started as consulting gigs.
Same.
So nothing wrong with that, but that's just different from what we do.
Little bit of a tangent, but related. Back in the Stone Ages, late 90s, early 2000s, I was a technical recruiter. And back then, there was a vehicle called contract to hire that was really popular. Mm-hmm. And when I was talking to mid to senior level individual contributors, I always told them, this is really the best for both of you. Because for the client, they get to know somebody for 6 months before they make the commitment to
mm-hmm.
actually bring them on. But as the consultant who's considering working there, if at the end of 6 months you don't feel like this is a good match for you, you can put contract completed on your resume and wash your hands of it, and you're not stuck with a bunch of bounces.
Yeah. No, I was mentioning, I think I mentioned Dave Kellogg before. There's another guy, Jason Lemkin. I don't know if he's the founder of SaaStr, which actually is going on right now. Which we're it's a little inconvenient that Startup Boston and SaaStr at the same time, because they can't be two places at once. Great event, great content, but and he publishes a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. And one of the things, and again, this is not, if you know anything about how venture capital works, this is like, duh. But he's like, look, if you join a startup, you got to think 10 years. That's what you really got to think this is going to be.
Yeah.
And hopefully it'll be less. You'll get acquired, go public, you'll have an opportunity, but you really got to sort of get on the headset of I'm doing this for 10 years.
But if
And
you're acquired,
that's a big commitment. So yeah,
it is. But if you're acquired, that's another 2 to 5 years that
Maybe.
you're with the new company. Usually, I think for senior executives at least.
yeah. Well, and that's also for senior executives for sure. Although not always. Sometimes they want the senior executives to go away, depending on the senior, like that crazy sales leader that you talked about before. They probably weren't necessarily as excited, but anyway, I don't know the particulars of that. So it depends, but yes. The point is, I was really trying to support what you were saying about the kind of, contract to hire. It gives you a chance, it gives you both the chance to decide, like, is this really something I want to sign up for the long term? Because if you're really going to sort of jump in as a full-time employee, particularly in the early stages, you got to really, maybe it won't be 10, but that's the kind of headset you have to put on about the commitment you're making. That's a big commitment. 10 years is a big chunk of your life.
Yes.
So, and the ability to maybe try it out on a smaller scale before I jump in and for the company as well, I think that's a good thing all around. So.
Agreed. Now, I think we should wrap up here soon, but one last question before we do. When you're coming aboard as a fractional CEO or leader, what do you look for initially? My assumption is you want to make a big impact early. What types of things are you looking to do there?
Yeah, big impact early, but I think material to growth, material to build on. I mean, to me, going back to the foundational stuff we talked about earlier, that you have to build a business, right? Is the product solid? Is the culture good, right? Like, oftentimes, like one of the clients I'm working with, it just basically, it's a bootstrap business. They never raised outside capital. It's just been run as, and people hear this as a pejorative, it's not, but it's been more of a lifestyle business, right? They really haven't put a growth headset on, but now they want to grow. So bring that on. But, I wouldn't do that if the product wasn't good, if the customers weren't happy, if the culture wasn't good. And it is a good culture. It's a culture that maybe, we got to grow is a little bit different than kind of what we've been hearing in the past or focused on in the past, right? Because you push maybe I'm using the Brene Brown, growth happens when you get out of your comfort zone, right? So, but gently, right? So, but you look for strong fundamentals, I guess. And to me, it's product, it's what they're offering, what they're selling. Obviously things like, what's the market opportunity as well. But the two biggest things are kind of product, tech, and culture. So, you don't want to go someplace where I have worked places. There's one in particular, again, I won't name names, not the one I was talking about last year, where, the idea was great, but the product fundamentally didn't work. And it's like, okay, that's not going to work over the long term. Right, yeah. So, and that's something, by the way, that's one I wish I had tried before I bought, because I would have found these things out, because it was a great demo. But then you sort of find out there's hamster wheels back behind the demo, making the thing work, and the product doesn't work. Well, if the product doesn't work, the customers aren't going to be happy. The culture's not going to be very good because people are going to be fighting fires all day. So for me, I look for that solid foundational stuff that is, like I said, a lot of it's product, tech, culture. So
what I find most interesting about what you said is it's pretty darn near verbatim to what an investor says they look for in a company that they put money in.
Yeah, it depends what kind of investor. Although this is changing, venture investors tend to look for a very big market. And I know we're kind of coming up on time here, but there's a whole, vertical SaaS, the dynamic is very interesting, because for a long time, saying you were vertical as a SaaS company was a bad thing, because they say, well, if you're vertical, then it's a smaller TAM, total addressable market. Yeah. And that's not investable, because we need to be able to build $1 billion company. And how are you going to build $1 billion company selling to dentists? Or, one of the most successful AI startups I know, that's who they sell to. They sell to dentists. I will tell you, 5-10 years ago, you came in and you said, we're going to vertically focus on dentists. You would have had a very hard time getting a meeting with a VC. Now you can.
You would have needed a dentist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as opposed to I'm going to go attack Microsoft or Google or So yeah, but different investors look for different things. Some of them do still look. In the venture world, there is more of a tendency to look for a large market opportunity, but I think there's more of an appreciation happening now, because what's happening is that a lot of what I call the horizontal stuff, and AI is a great example of this. That's where the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Metas, and there will be some startups who displace some of what they do, but a lot of that ground is pretty, Salesforce, is pretty penetrated, which I know is where MuleSoft ultimately wound up.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, the company I was talking about used to compete with MuleSoft, the one where the product wasn't quite great. So I shouldn't say too much or people identify me and get mad at me, but you wouldn't know them. It was a small startup. But anyway, we were kind of in that market, so I know a lot about the data integration market. So market opportunity, market size. Now, PE looks at things very differently. PE is usually looking to kind of restructure. They still want to grow, but they're kind of looking for how can we kind of take this thing and more intelligently put it together. There was actually a really interesting piece. It wasn't really about PE per se. It was more public market. But I don't know if you know Andy Kessler. He writes every week for the Wall Street Journal.
Yep.
And he wrote a very interesting piece about Alphabet Google last week where he was arguing, first of all, his main argument was that the government shouldn't take apart Alphabet, but that they should do it to themselves because the companies almost become ungainly in terms of how the businesses, and obviously for a long time that model worked really well, but companies get to a point where they really need to reshape the whole thing, and he was kind of making that argument, and he was saying, no, the government shouldn't do it, but the companies should definitely do it to themselves, and it's a pretty good piece. So anyway, so other investors look for opportunities like that to reshape and rebuild and restructure, and that's kind of more PE as opposed to VC is like, find me a very big opportunity and build a unicorn. So, by the way, you said you wanted to circle back on unicorn, although I don't know if we're out of time,
we're too far afield.
So we'll have to do it again.
I was just going to say, I'd love to have you back on the show.
Yeah.
I love being here live. This is awesome. The one challenge, though, is the audio isn't all it could be, and there is no video. So when we do it again, we'll do it the old school way.
Sounds great.
Awesome.
Well, make it happen.
I thank you very much for being on the show. I'd like to thank Suffolk University again for hosting us. Thanks, Steph and Startup Boston, for the great event. It's been wonderful, Chris.
This has been a lot of fun. Thanks
awesome.
so much, Gerry.
Thanks you.
Okay.